January 10th of this year was the 365th day that I prayed the Rosary. I'm told that even for lifelong Catholics, this is an unusual thing to do, but I am not a lifelong Catholic. If the people who knew me in my teens and in my 20s watch this, they will definitely be shocked. I will explain, but first, if you would like to read my account of how praying the Rosary every day for a whole year changed me, you can head over to my Substack, JennyEHolland.substack.com. It's my dog. And you can find my essays there. You can subscribe for a weekly essay into your inbox. And if you want to get a paid subscription, you can find out about the paid subscriber perks. I also want to say a huge thank you to everyone who subscribed to this YouTube channel in the last 2 weeks, which has gotten me over the 10,000 subscriber mark. And I'm absolutely floored and honored and delighted that you're here. So thank you for watching. I was raised by two liberal left atheists parents. Both of them were raised in Catholic families, my father in Ireland and my mother in America. By the time they reached adulthood, both of them felt that Catholicism was repressive. They were the first people in their families, or the first generation in their families, to attend university. Leaving home for the sort of big city in the mid 1960s was like going to a different universe from the traditional families and communities that they grew up in. While at university, they came to the conclusion that religious faith was a tired old superstition at best and a tool for the oppression of women in particular at worst. So by the time I grew up I was growing up in the 1980s, in my large extended family on both sides of the Atlantic, only my American grandfather, was still practicing his faith religiously. And then by the 90s, when I hit my teens, apart from that one person, my grandfather, nobody I knew went to church anymore. And yet the world seemed mostly okay. It wasn't perfect. There were double standards. Bad things happened. But when we were kids, no adult ever told us that our trauma meant we would never be the same again. In fact, when bad things did happen, we normally didn't even tell the adults. And the word trauma was not used for this. It was used mostly for like getting hit by a speeding car. So by our mid-teens, we had a lot of freedom and we just went about our lives and planning for our adulthoods, which we thought would be very like our teens, just with more money and more freedom. But now, when I think of the 90s, I think of them as the before times when the liberal secular world order was still working. Now, I know that it was like that because it was still anchored in what was left of the traditional values and the classical liberal values, which were still somewhat living side by side. And that created the best of both worlds, both order and freedom. And I had a great youth. A lot of people my age, Gen X or older, will agree that me saying this is not just nostalgia. Things really did change in an extreme way. And as I mentioned in previous videos, I went through a lefty phase in my high school and college years. And even though I grew out of that by the time I was in my early 20s, I 100% remained in the sort of Democrat Party / Labor Party camp. I still thought, like my father had told me my entire childhood, that religion was oppressive, that it was a fantasy essentially to help mankind handle the terror of existence. And once science had come along, my dad's argument went, that put an end to any religious legitimacy. I saw no reason to question that because again, we were still living in a highly functional liberal secular society. So it seemed evident to me that a secular morality was perfectly possible. I could see it all around me. The people all around me, and myself included, were living it. For the most part, people were sane and functional and even happy. And here we are in 2026, and I am now on my 300th, I think, day of praying the Rosary. So what happened? How did this happen? Well, woke happened. And even though that's a bit of an oversimplification, it's not an exaggeration. When woke showed itself as the ideological system for what we used to just call evil, I began to have second thoughts about the non-existence of God. If evil is real, then so must good be real. And that's good with a capital G. And what was the source of good? Well, it was definitely not man. Without a formal announcement, the normal functioning society that I remembered was just gone one day. For the last 10 years, it's just been lies and hysteria everywhere I looked. I'll give you some examples of the things that alerted me to what time it really was. In 2022, I interviewed an inmate in the prison that's euphemistically called the California Institute for Women, who told me about what it's like to be housed with men, including some with HIV, and many of whom were sexual offenders. And I saw the failure of mainstream feminism to defend these women, choosing instead to defend the men. I saw shout your abortion campaigns and the sale of abortion themed jewelry. I saw kids being subjected to drag queens and taught about butt plugs in fancy private schools. I heard young men talk about how internet porn had broken their minds and their hearts. And I heard young women talk about how it had destroyed their ability to really say no. I saw professors and speakers at universities be hounded and menaced by baying mobs of woke students and administrators too cowardly to step in. I saw a television show that celebrated the castration of a boy and made his monster mother into a star. I saw people lose their goddamn minds over masks and vaccines, and then faraway countries that for some reason were more important to them than the homeless people in their own neighborhoods. I saw white people screaming at other white people on the streets. And for what? For being white, of course. I saw the media collectively pretend that Joe Biden was the best president ever, even when he could not string a coherent sentence together, and said things like, you can't build a wall high enough to keep out a vaccine. And my favorite in the debate with Donald Trump, we finally beat Medicare. And yet we had Joe Scarborough telling us the next day it was the most cogent he'd ever seen. I saw the government try to claim that traditional Catholics, people like my own grandfather, were domestic terrorists. And then I saw Trump, apparently the only man willing to stand against all of this evil, as imperfect as he may be, and I saw him get shot in the ear and immediately rise up, blood on his face, and put his fist in the air, and I saw the hand of God. The biggest failures of the secular science-based worldview, to me, there were two of them. The first, how it failed to stop the idea that sex changes should be made available to minors. Just a quick little fact here, more than 30 U.S. professional organizations in medicine and mental health support gender-affirming care for minors. That includes the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, and the Endocrine Society. What the F? And number two, how the medical and scientific and public policy communities reacted when presented with pushback in good faith with evidence-based concerns during the pandemic. Both of these things destroyed my prior assumptions that these professionals, science, medicine, policy professionals, were actually rational beings who could evaluate things coolly and on their merits. And it really started to become obvious to me that if a secular morality was really possible, and if it was an improvement on the old religious morality, these two catastrophic systems failures would not have occurred because they were behavioral failures, not knowledge failures. And that made me think that what needs to underpin our behavior as humans is a renewed moral sense. It was during the lockdowns that I really began to countenance God for the first time. The disorientation of suddenly finding yourself totally restricted made me realize that the only thing I could fully control was my inner experience. The only way out was in. It took a few more years for me to start praying. But each year, the woke world seemed to get more and more insane, and that made me value the old traditions of my ancestors more and more. And so by January of last year, the Rosary had become part of my morning routine, and it became something I looked forward to as a moment of peace in those first hours of the day. So, how has praying the rosary every day for a year changed me? Well, it's changed my internal life a lot. By nature, I am quite impatient. I'm always in a hurry. I'm always on the hunt for the next thing. Praying to Mary has given me the gift of patience, which, when you're trying to build a business out of something as ephemeral as your own thoughts, is an absolute necessity. And I'm also a very restless person. I was always on the lookout for an escape or a change of scenery, thinking it would fix all my problems. I grew up moving around a lot, and it became kind of an addiction. Moving will always fix it. Somehow, the daily repetition of the rosary anchored me in place and balanced out my old patterns of thinking. That voice in my head that was always telling me, oh, pack up, run off somewhere better. And as a result, I have found a mental stillness that I have never experienced before. Praying for detachment from the things of the world, in my mind, is one of the healthiest things you can do in our contemporary society. Our contemporary society is a place where we are constantly bombarded with images specifically designed to make us long for what we don't have. A different house, a different body, a different life. And it also is designed to divide us from those we love because of our strongly held but conflicting opinions. So being able to create a distance between that outward reality and your own mind is very close to being a superpower. Detachment from the things of the world is also a crucial mantra in this line of work. When you're a small creator in an economy full of highly monetized opinions, many of which serve very dubious purposes, there is probably no better principle to adhere to. Stay on the right side of your ego and let God, not the attention economy, guide your work. And I say that not as someone convinced that I have some sort of personal hotline to the higher power. That's not it. But I do choose to believe, and I choose faith. And it comes from a rational place. I don't do it because it comes naturally or because Mary came to me in a vision or anything awesome like that. For me, it's more mundane and kind of humble. I choose faith because I have seen its opposite. Ultimately, it's a practice, just like any other. Just like you lift weights to increase your physical strength and to look better, I pray the rosary for the emotional strength that comes from knowing that I'm a child of God. Thank you for listening. And thank you for saving culture with me. Hit that like and subscribe button. And if you want to check out my Substack, it's at jennyeholland.substack.com.